Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Portland Friday Forum. City Club is where we bring civic-minded people together to make Portland and Oregon a better place for everyone to live, work, and play. I'm Karen Curvin, President of City Club, and I would like to welcome members and guests alike, those of you who join us today at Sentinel, and those of you listening on OPB radio or watching on Portland Community Media. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners ensures we put on the state's best civic programs week after week. I'd like to thank our media partner, Oregon Business Magazine. Our current Friday Forum sponsors are AARP, Barron Liebman, Iberdrola Renewables, Perkins Coie, Portland General Electric, and Providence Health and Services. We are grateful for your support and commitment to City Club's mission. Please join me in a warm round of applause for all of them. Join us next week when we welcome Maya Lin, the artist who came to fame as the designer of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., to our stage. Also, we partnered with Awesome Portland, the local chapter of the Global Awesome Foundation, which is dedicated to funding artists, leaders, and dreamers who are on a mission to prove Portland is awesome. Every 2 months, they provide a $1,000 grant to projects that make Portland better. This month, we partnered with them to focus on projects that advance racial equality and improve the lives for the city's homeless population. Join us on Thursday, November 20 at Ford Food and Drink at 7 p.m., where 5 finalists will present their projects and the awesome trustees will make their grant. There will also be an opportunity for attendees to vote on a People's Choice grant of $100. It should be a great night, and we'd love to see you there. You can learn more about City Club events, purchase tickets, and become a member on our website, pdxcityclub.org. And now a quick pitch for our annual fund. Because we all love Portland, we need to make it better for all Portlanders. Here at City Club, membership, event attendance, the number of research projects completed, the visibility and impact of City Club is up and increasing. We are becoming a younger, more racially diverse organization focused on serving all of Portland. We are doing a great job, but there's much more to do. Portland still has too many unmet civic needs. Today we are asking for your support, $25, $50, $100, so that we can build a club for every Portlander. You will find donation envelopes on your tables. Please fill them out and give them to a City Club staff member or associate at the end of today's program. Thank you. As always, we will be live tweeting today's program. You can follow along and join the conversation using the hashtag PDXCityClub. Today's moderator, Roy Samsel, will facilitate a Q&A session with the audience and our guests. Members, please come to the microphone to ask your question. For all of our audience members, please locate the index cards on the center of your tables and write your questions on them during the forum. Hold your cards up high and City Club staff will collect them prior to the start of Q&A. And now for our program. As City Club prepares to celebrate our centennial anniversary in 2016, we will continue to ask the question, what will Portland and Oregon look like in the next 100 years? In recognition of Native American Heritage Month, we are pleased to offer today's Friday Forum topic, Cultural Revitalization, a building block to prosperous communities. At City Club of Portland, we firmly believe the future vitality and livability of our city and state is inherently tied to the prosperity of our first people, who include descendants of the Multnomah, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Molalla, and hundreds of other tribes whose members and descendants now call this region home. Portland has the 9th largest Native American population in the United States. Our Native American community is diverse, multi-tribal, multi-ethnic, and their stories are powerful. To begin our forum, I'd like to invite Carlos McNair, a foster care support specialist at the Native American Youth and Family Center, to the stage. Carlos is Modoc and Klamath and will perform for us a round dance song. During his song, it is customary to stand. I would ask you to please rise. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Good afternoon. My name is Matt Morton. I'm from the Squaxin Island tribe in Western Washington, and I have the pleasure to serve as the Executive Director of the Native American Youth and Family Center, and also as a board member with Portland Public Schools. On October 27th, 1975, the City Club of Portland published a report entitled "The Urban Indian of Portland." 2 years earlier, a research committee was established and charged with investigating the role of government and private agencies and community-based organizations in serving Portland's Native community in the areas of education, housing, and employment. I came across this report actually at the Oregon Historical Society, and as I read it through the 31 pages, I was struck, pleased, sometimes a little confused, but often very hopeful with what was written nearly 40 years ago. There was one sentence in particular that stood out to me among the rest. There is agreement among Indians that their problems are best met by programs designed and run by Indians. For those of you in the room who I've had the pleasure to meet with over the last few years, especially those working in local government, you may have heard me at some point say that I believe that the solutions to the challenges of our community actually reside within the community itself. Problems are best met by programs designed and run by Indians. For me, this statement rings as true today as it did nearly 40 years ago. But unlike in the mid-1970s, we now recognize that the destiny of the urban Indian of Portland is intrinsically tied to the future and the livability of our city. Today's topic, cultural revitalization, a building block to prosperous communities, will explore how rural, reservation, and urban Native people across the region and nation are using culture and tradition as a foundation to reinvigorate their communities, and in the process, build strong alliances and partnerships with others. It is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished guest today. Our moderator, Roy Samsel, Wyandot and Choctaw, is an invaluable mentor to many Native leaders and advocates in the area. Roy is the former director of Portland State University's Institute for Tribal Government. Eric Quamps, Yakima, is the director of the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla Indian Reservation, Department of Natural Resources. Eric shows visionary leadership, integrating traditional, ecological, and cultural knowledge with scientific practice, especially in his work with First Foods. For nearly 20 years, Roberta Cordero, Coastal Band of Chumash Nation, has been helping give tribal people a voice in coastal marine planning in California, and has helped the Chumash Nation reestablish a connection to their seafaring roots. Janine Kamino, an enrolled Quinault tribal member, lives in Seattle and is the executive director of the National Urban Indian Family Coalition. She has spent the last 10 years advocating for American Indians and Alaska Natives who live off reservations and is committed to providing a voice of this often silent majority in Indian country. Nicole Maher Klinkett is currently the CEO of the Northwest Health Foundation and has spent the balance of her career as a tireless advocate for Native people in and around the Portland area. Thank you all so much for being here. Roy, the forum is yours.
Thank you, Matt. It's nice to see you all. We're going to have a dialogue and a discussion. I urge you all to participate as we move forward. Eric, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about First Foods, what you've been doing with the Confederated Tribes of Umatilla, and share with us some of those thoughts on how that is important to the topic that Matt has introduced us to. Please.
Thank you, Roy. So at the Umatilla Tribes Department of Natural Resources, we actually take our mission, and even the structure of our organization is built around what the community recognizes as First Foods and serving ritual of traditional wild foods at religious and cultural ceremonies. That order, that if you think of a ritual, it's really nothing more than an order, right? And this order is informed by the tribe's creation belief and its understanding of the landscape that it's lived on for thousands of years. And I think that resonates with people because, you know, everybody cares about water and food. Most communities and religions have some involvement of food and ritual. And so at a personal level, using First Foods to communicate the tribe's rights and goals is an effective way, I think, for people to relate to us. And when we look deeper into that serving order, we can see ecological and spatial information that I can use as a manager and working with other agencies, and we can find overlap in our responsibilities. And so it becomes a way about talking about where we're more similar than more different and getting back to something that we all care about, and that's food. And that's certainly true in a city like Portland, which is very well known for its food, whether it's food carts or fine dining. I think we all appreciate the importance of food.
Thank you. Roberta, welcome. You've been working with your nation for years, reestablishing canoeing and the gathering of seafoods and of dealing with ocean spatial planning. Share with us some of those observations and thoughts and your role, well known across this country, as an educator and facilitator. Please.
Well, my participation in and support of revitalizing our maritime culture as Indigenous peoples really began in the Northwest. I lived in Seattle for many years. My kids were all born there. They still live in Washington. But we became acquainted with the Canoe Nations, and I was lucky to be in Bella Bella in 1993, which totally changed my view. It was kind of brought a bunch of things together in my life, trying to figure out who I am as a Native person. And that sent me home. They sent us with an eagle feather and said, go tell your people to build a canoe, because we have been a maritime culture for thousands of years, but we didn't have a canoe that we owned. And so luckily when I got home again, after living away for 35 years, there were other people who had also heard that message. And I know that this message has been out there with a lot of Polynesian people, and certainly the people in the Pacific Northwest. And it's just canoes, do it. Because that characterizes, it's like a signal of whether that culture is alive and well. And what we learned, our canoes are very different from what you see up here. And we have long double-bladed paddles, and so you really have to be together when you paddle in a canoe. And that is a wonderful metaphor for how we have to work together. You have to have somebody who's setting the pace, you have to have somebody who's guiding, and you have to be absolutely together, as well as knowing the ocean that you're in and to have respect for that. And so as we've done that, a lot of those old values have begun to be more solid in our community. We've been able to work together to move towards something I think that until we were, and this was not the first effort at bringing out the canoe, and it's a very long story. Some of it's really hard to talk about, and I won't try and tell it to you here. But a lot of our efforts as Chumash people for a long time had been protection of archaeological sites, of burial sites, which is fighting against. And for this, it was a change. We could work together to build something, and that has been a really strong building block for revitalizing language and song and many other things.
Thank you. So our next person that I'm going to call on here, Janine, you know, she represents 17 cities, 24 organizations across the country, representing the non-reservation urban Indian populations, which represents well up to 80% of all of the Indian and Native people in this country. Share with us some of that, please.
Thanks for having me, first of all. Looking at the urban populations of Native Americans in the United States, like you said, you really do have about 80% of the population lives off reservation right now, and they're really serviced by organizations from across the country who provide a huge range of both cultural and social and economic services to this population. I always sort of call urban Indian organizations embassies within these cities, because you have a lot of different tribal members from, sometimes, like here in Portland, you're serving over 200 of the 500 tribes are being serviced here in Portland, Oregon. And that's really common throughout the country. So looking at some of the better models out there for how the service is being delivered, really a couple come to mind, and one is Minneapolis, Minnesota, an organization called Little Earth. And that's the only geographically based urban Indian community in America. So they're doing magnificent work in Minneapolis, and have been really since the 70s. As far as the culturally based organizations, the one, and I swear I'm not pandering because I'm in Portland here, the one that comes to mind first and foremost is actually the NEA Family Center, located right here in Portland, Oregon. I can say with full confidence, when the rest of the country sort of looks at urban Indian organizations from across America, the NEA Family Center really comes to the forefront, because they've really figured out, and a lot of cities have done this, but not as successfully as NEA has done it in Portland, which is sort of figuring out that magic combination of how are you really effective at providing services to your constituency. And what that is, it really comes down to being community driven. And I think that it's really simple for a lot of nonprofits to say we're community driven. But what NEA has done is they've actually been able to actualize that in a large way. Like, their programming is reflective of their community. They provide cultural services, they provide economic services and housing and health, and you sort of name that whole spectrum of things that nonprofits do, and NEA has actually excelled at all of them. So I think everyone should give NEA a big hand.
That was a wonderful ad. Nicole, you and your work in Portland have identified Indigenous leadership, and that relationship to leadership and prosperity is a piece of your work. Share with us some of those results.
Thanks. Actually, I want to start by saying that I've been a member and coming to City Club for over 14 years, and I don't think we've ever had a moderator who is as handsome and charming as you are, Roy. So, thank you, City Club. So, about 12 years ago, and actually you were part of this, many leaders from multiple organizations in Portland really came together and began to really think about a preferred future and the future that we wanted for ourselves. And we began to really reflect on many of the things that my colleagues have shared today, and really this idea that we were one of the largest Native communities, and while our tribal communities in Oregon knew that they had many members who lived here, and around the country other people seemed to know there was a large Native presence, it certainly felt like Portland hadn't noticed. And while we had this large, vibrant Native community, we also had a lot of challenges, and we began to have a conversation about what it might look like to be visible and to have our community be in a position to really implement their own definition of success. And the place that we got to was really around Indigenous leadership, and we began to build out a plan that thought about many different pathways for leadership. So first and foremost, we created the Portland Indian Leaders Roundtable that was really a place for leaders from different local tribes who have Portland offices and the 20-some different Native organizations to meet regularly and really create that space, because when our leaders are united and have a shared perspective on policy, we're much more successful. We created a Native American leadership program that actually serves statewide to grow our next generation of young leaders. And we also developed a group called the Youth and Elders Council so that our young people and our elders would have a place front and center to influence perspective and to be recognized as those leaders. And then I think the last thing that we did was really build deep connections and a coalition with other communities of color, and we, the Native community was very active in founding and creating the Coalition of Communities of Color, really recognizing that we have our own Indigenous values and beliefs, but we're connected to other communities as well. And the one thing that I would say was a really important cross-cutting value throughout all of those efforts is that we were not necessarily trying to send our people to leadership programs so they could learn how to be your typical leader or learn the values or skills that are perceived as leadership skills. We wanted leaders who were proud to be Native, knew their own culture and tribal traditions, and brought those values with them everywhere they went, because we felt like that would be what was best for our children, and we felt like that would be a wonderful gift to the rest of our region.
Good, thank you. Let me just compliment you and others on that leadership and what that has meant. I want to go back to Janine and talk to us a little bit more about the national scope and what you're dealing with both at local and statewide and national communities on this sort of education. And so take it from there, please.
Well, one of the things we're working on, and Nicole made mention of it, is that in looking at all of these urban Indian nonprofits, including the one here in Portland, is that what we find is that when organizations become more sophisticated at navigating through policy arenas, that often the resources follow that. And often, you know, everything sort of associated with knowing how to navigate policy generally speaks to healthier organizations. So with that in mind, what we're really looking at from the national level is we just finished a 12-city policy roundtable project that will come out this year, where we'll really take a look at knowing that politics is local and policy is local, and a lot of these organizations do need to know how to navigate in their local arenas. And what we look at from the national perspective is, you know, what kind of similarities are between these 12 cities that could possibly translate into national policy.
Roberta, you have had a lot of interface with the tribes in California as it relates to ocean policy. That was a major push of this administration a couple of years ago, declaring oceans as being an important part of our research. Share with us a little bit the involvement of those communities with that issue at both the state and the local level.
Sure. Well, I think my involvement was prompted by the understanding, deepening over my life, that the ocean is everything. Without a healthy ocean, we cannot survive. Nothing will survive. It doesn't matter if you live on the coast or not. The ocean is everything for us. And as many Indian people here will know, that even when you aren't in your homeland, and you can't reap the benefits as maybe our ancestors did to be able to eat and hunt there and live there without paying too much rent. And that we still have an ongoing feeling of responsibility to make sure things are healthy there. And that really drives us. The responsibility doesn't go away. The privilege is there, the responsibility is there, and even when you can't reap the privilege, you still have the responsibility. And I know that the Indian peoples that I've worked with in California have been both recognized tribes and non-recognized. And in California, there are about 110 recognized tribes, federally recognized, and almost that many non-recognized tribes. So in some places where there would be people that are invited to the table to talk about protection and development and whatever else is going on, the non-recognized tribes often don't get invited. And so my special care has been that we would be invited. I belong to a non-recognized tribe, although California recognizes sort of, you know, there's not a formal way of doing that. But from San Francisco to San Diego, which is, what, 500 miles or something, there are no federally recognized tribes on the coast. And so it was my special interest to make sure that we got to the table. So I participated in the Marine Life Protection Act initiative in 2 different iterations. The first was for the South Coast as representing the peoples there, but not just my tribe. And my main task was to do outreach and bring people to the table. Well, the South Coast, as you might imagine, with Los Angeles and San Diego being major cities that were included there, is hugely populous. And the Indian population is a very small percentage, and when you count just California Indians, it's even smaller. So we weren't able to make a lot of influence as far as the design of the marine protected areas was concerned, but we got a voice in there, and people started to realize that there's still Indians there, and that we still care about what's going on, because a lot of people didn't really think that that we were still there, and that has a lot to do with the education system there, which concentrates in the history part of primary education on the mission system and how wonderful it was. Well, not, but I could go on for a long time about that. But so raising that awareness also helped us to say over and over again, we need to talk with you, State of California, before you make these plans, not afterwards. We need to be part of the laws that will affect us. And so I was also invited to I sat on the stakeholders group in the South Coast. I was invited to sit on the Blue Ribbon Task Force when they did the North Coast iteration. And those were all federally recognized tribes, and so they had a much deeper ability to participate consistently because they could pay people to be there for them. They were organized. They're accustomed to working with all the environmentalists and other people that are up there. The population difference is different, and so the proportion is hugely different. They had, like, I think 9 stakeholders who were from Indian tribes. And just in the process of going from South Coast to North Coast, the state finally got the message, and they started to do consultation with the tribes. And with the result that, two things, the traditional uses of those coastal areas and ocean areas were maintained to a large degree in the North Coast. We're still working to extend that. But the other part was that the governor heard that we need to have consultation policies with the state, and they've actually started to do that. There's several that have been written that are quite good, and so I feel really proud and happy about that.
I'm glad you shared that, because again, let's talk about the range and the depth of these types of issues, how significantly they can be. And we were visiting with Spencer Beebe earlier today, and he said, you know, there's a wonderful thing that we can learn because there's 10,000 years of history within the Native and Indian communities that knowledge allows us to build this sort of cooperation among each other. Eric, I wonder if you might share a little bit about your management of a natural resources department with one of the federally recognized tribes in the state of Oregon, and how diverse that management responsibility is. because I think it's important to this discussion.
So the management is diverse in terms of both our, I guess, our ecological responsibilities and our spatial and political responsibilities. When I think about our work, I always return to the serving order of the foods, the first being water, the second being fish, the third being big game, the fourth being roots, and the fifth being berries. And we work from, you know, Willamette Falls on the Willamette River, where we harvest lamprey for the community, to Montana, where we've reestablished bison hunting for tribal members, a goal that was a primary feature of treaty negotiations back in 1855. A number of the fish, the salmon and the lamprey, are anadromous, so they extend out into the marine environment. So it's a very extensive, you know, spatial responsibility we have to cover all of these resources. We have emergent work in the women's foods, the roots and the berries that previously had been unaddressed. And we're looking at how those are distributed across federal lands, Forest Service lands, BLM lands, because the tribe retains rights to harvest these resources on those federal lands. And we're doing that throughout southeastern Oregon, northeastern Oregon, southeastern Washington. So it's very extensive. And that carries with it then extensive political relationships with, you know, in Washington and Olympia and Salem and Oregon and in DC. So it's very extensive work.
Yeah, and you know, I'm delighted to see this room today, because part of what we're talking about, isn't it, is how do we strengthen what your president and what Karen was talking about, and expanding the diversity that this organization and this city has with its various communities. Nicole, share with us a piece of that, because this was a great deal of your work and continues to be. So ideas that you might share with the folks here that would encourage them on how they might want to proceed from here.
In relation to City Club or just in general?
In general, please.
In general, okay. So, I mean, I think one of the things that I love to talk about when I think about Portland's diversity, and people love to sort of reference as though Portland is on this journey to becoming diverse. And I think it's always important to remember that Portland is already diverse. More than 1 out of every 2 children in Multnomah County is a person of color, and 1 out of every 3 adults is a person of color. And when you look at where our age is represented, that's really important as well. One of the perceptions about the Native community is that we live somewhere else and that our population is decreasing, when in fact the opposite is true. More than 50% of our population is under the age of 18. And we actually have one of the highest birth rates, which my family actually resembles that. And so I think what that really means is, and why that story is important, is that the same is true in the Latino and the African American and in our immigrant and refugee communities. And so when you think about any issue that you might care about, if it's an environmental issue, if it's an education issue, if it's a child welfare issue, you mathematically cannot improve outcomes in any of those areas unless you have deep engagement of communities of color and focused and intentional efforts to improve outcomes with those populations. It's just not statistically possible otherwise. And as our city has grown and changed, and where we have examples where we have not done that, we as an entire community have paid a significant price. And where we have done it well and where we have been thoughtful, we as an entire city and community have benefited significantly. And so I think the message I would leave those with when they consider that is that when we think about our race relations in our region, sometimes folks feel uncomfortable, and it's actually not helpful at all to feel guilt or shame or discomfort. It's most helpful to really think about your particular role and your specific influence that you can use to ensure that whatever board or civic activity you're involved in is truly reflective of our community's future.
Well done. You know, we have a few moments left before we go to the questions from the City Club members and those that you have put down on your notes. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give a sort of a closing thought on where you're at. Let's start down at our end there. Janine, please.
What kind of closing thought?
Well, I have one for you, and that is the relationship between the urban Indian and Native populations that you're representing, and that interface within their own communities, within their own tribal communities. Because a piece of this is, you know, none of it's easy, and I want her to share with you the fact that these are challenges not only among the city of Portland or this organization, but among tribal governments and their own citizens as well.
Wow, there are books written about that. I'll try and keep it as short as I can. So American Indians, when we live in cities, generally it comes about as a product of relocation, which was a federal act which put us in cities. So one of the big challenges that our population faces is that I always say that we're triplicate citizens. So we are first and foremost citizens of our tribal nations, and often those are really far away from where we might live. When you're looking at, say, your tribes from Oklahoma, that's a long ways away from Portland, Oregon. So that relationship that you have with home for a lot of our Native people can be a little bit challenging to get home. But what we do find with our populations throughout the country really is that Native people tend to be very migratory. We do go home for ceremony, we do go home for general election, we do go home for different types of family gatherings. And I think that there is, you know, increasingly, and this is something I think, you know, within Indian country that we'll have to begin wrapping our heads around is, you know, we're coming up on our 4th and 5th generation of urban-born Native people, and what does that mean? And I think that's a rich conversation that really needs to happen in the future.
Berta. Last thoughts.
What kind of closing thought do you want me to throw back at you?
You realize how unfair these comments are. She would normally be doing this in the course of a day-and-a-half consultation with a federal agency over several hours. You have about a minute.
Okay. Let me see. I guess I want to go back to some of the thoughts that Matt expressed in his introduction, and that's about self-realization, about going to the people who have the problems for the solutions. So important. I'm first a mediator. I think I've done that all my life and then found somewhere along the way that I could be a professional doing it. And what I found in being a mediator is that I don't have to bring my ideas for solutions, but I can help people to talk until I can create an environment in which they can talk freely and get out their ideas and understand why they are sitting there for that day. And they can come up with the most creative ideas. I never would have come up with them. And I think probably my favorite mediation, and I just use this as a metaphor constantly, was when 2 young women came to me. I was in a community mediation program. And they had been lifelong friends, and they had fallen apart over a guy. One of them had been, he'd been the boyfriend of one of them first, and then they broke up, and then the other one was his girlfriend for a while, and they just, I don't know all the details of it, but he was out of the picture completely by the time they came to me. But they talked for about 15 minutes each, and usually a mediation will take 2 to 3 hours. At the end of that half an hour or so, they got up and hugged each other because they had heard each other. They had understood what had happened, and they didn't need to do anything more. And so, as an Indigenous leader, my best work is if I can just help people to understand.
Thank you. Eric.
So I guess my hope would be that people in the broader public can view tribes not just as, you know, some relic or novelty of the region's past, but a vibrant part of its present and its future. Tribes have not just rights, but resources and capacity that's significant and the challenges that the region faces are going to require collaboration, and the challenges that even the country faces are going to require collaboration. There's not going to be any large sources of, state or federal dollars to throw at problems now or in the immediate future, and I think tribes are a great partner to consider in helping identify and resolve the issues in the Northwest, whether it's economic or cultural or natural resource based. And I hope we would agree that water quality for everybody is important, that safety of these foods for everybody is important, and that we can all enjoy these resources and even enjoy, hopefully, collaborating to protect and restore them.
So I would just close by highlighting some of the great strengths of our communities. In this region alone, if you look at the 20 largest nonprofits that exist, it represents over $60 million in income brought to our region from philanthropic and governmental grants. It creates thousands of jobs for Native and non-Native people. Our community actually is one of the most civically engaged and has one of the highest voting percentages. And our community is incredibly philanthropic in both Native causes and in a variety of other civic issues, despite being the ethnic group with the highest rate of poverty. So those are some really amazing strengths that I think oftentimes when you hear about Native Americans, you'll hear negative statistics, and rather than all of the different resources and opportunities and what a deep investment we have in our future.
Thank you. I'm assuming that we're very close to being to the time in which we are going to take questions from our audience and the City Club membership. So if I could please ask you to introduce yourself, ask the question, and I will pass it on to the appropriate responder. Please, and welcome to the program.
My name is Dave Porter. I'm a City Club member. What is the status and importance of tribal languages, and how could public education in Portland help?
Nicole, let's start with you, and then could we go to Janine and then Roberta? Please, go.
So we have great diversity regionally in the metro region, and unfortunately, with the exception of several community and tribally led efforts to really teach tribal languages, for example, the Siletz Portland area office works very hard to teach their language to their tribal members. NAIA, I know, has tried a variety of different tribal languages, but to my knowledge, there is not an official effort within our local school districts to teach tribal languages, even though we actually have some of the largest numbers of Native students, but it's a diverse population, so I could be wrong, but I'm not aware of any effort.
Janine.
I would have to reflect what Nicole said. So I know that in Phoenix there has been a lot of efforts, because Navajo is the big tribe in Phoenix, to revitalize the Navajo language within the urban context. And I know in Minneapolis that there's Anishinaabe academies and different educational efforts that have happened. As far as that being integrated into public school systems, I've not heard of any official sort of large urban area contextual program.
You're on.
I couldn't tell you in general what's going on, but in California there's a lot of language revitalization and a lot of programs to support that. It's been really very active and effective. For us in Chumash, we didn't have any native speakers, so to speak. But now people have been studying enough, and really it came through learning the songs, when people wanted to learn songs because we were doing more things together. And then we had the songs from very old recordings that you couldn't hear very well, and sometimes we use clapper sticks to sing, and so that keeps the rhythm. And sometimes the noise on the old recording sounded like clapper sticks, and we're going like, well, was this part of it or wasn't it? You know, it was kind of weird. But but we often didn't understand what the words were, and so people started to get interested in the language, and there's enough language known among our people that some people are being able to receive songs now and do that. But the importance of this song is a different way of communicating. It's a different way of being, of experiencing, and so I think music is just important to everybody, but when you know that this song and this music has come down from generations, and sometimes we know who the ancestor was, it just helps you to feel more grounded and more sure of your identity. But even that aside, I think the importance of maintaining and revitalizing native languages is that they give us a different worldview. For Chumash and many indigenous languages, they are verb-based languages. English is a noun-based language, so if you think for a minute about what the difference is there, it's really incredibly different. So when you are talking from a verb-based language, you are talking about something really dynamic, which is what life is. We never finish what we're doing, really. You know, and so I can wish you Shumawish, Tipa Shumawish, and if I were to translate it into English, it would be something like, together we are making peace and harmony. But it's not, I wish you this noun thing, peace, which is a finished product, right? Or I wish you harmony. It's that we have to keep doing it. And I think that is probably one of the most important things about revitalizing language.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Mike Rosen, City Club. I appreciated the comment that if we want to affect social change in urban areas, we have to work effectively with communities of color. So particular to the urban Indian community, what are the basic starting steps that the white community has to take to work more effectively with the Indian community? Thanks.
Nicole.
So I think, you know, in my particular culture, there's something where they say where you show up, and when people see your face, it's a sign of respect. And so there are so many wonderful events and things happening within the Native community. For those who are interested in engaging and building relationship, showing up in our community and in our events is really perceived as a real sign of respect and authenticity. And also, not showing up with your predetermined idea of how you would like us to participate is a really important first step. So really showing up, listening, building relation, and then really finding out what the community wants for themselves and how you can be an ally and support, as opposed to trying to recruit Native people to participate in your thing per se.
We have a number of more questions, so let's go to the microphone, and then I owe Eric a response on language, please, so go.
Nicole just answered my question, so thank you.
Win Wakala, City Club member. From what I understand, especially with the poverty problem, Indian tribes do have a problem with human trafficking. And I also know that casinos are a target area. I don't know if you guys are involved with casinos, or are you working together to help your population?
Any comment? Go ahead, please.
I can lightly address that. It's not something, it's something that's a national issue. And I know we have one of our former executive directors from Minneapolis, Minnesota, actually was heading up a national Native women's task force on human trafficking. So there has been some work that has been done around that. But I think it's something within the urban context at any rate that I think we could all pay more attention to it and learn a bit more.
Nicole.
So it is true that Native women are overrepresented in human trafficking, and it's particularly true for communities who are located geographically in places like the I-5 corridor. I can say, having read just about every report on human trafficking in the Native community, I've actually never seen any evidence of it being tied to casinos, and I've actually never heard that mentioned before today, so I really can't speak to that except for to say that I'm not aware of any evidence of that particular connection.
Please, next question.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Shine. I'm with Momentum Alliance, a youth-led nonprofit, and so I'm using my role as a City Club member to ask a question on behalf of the two young people that I brought here today, Vanessa Dominguez and Jeremy Wiz. And one of their questions is, in addition to what, Nicole, you mentioned about the Youth and Elder Collaborative, you know, where are the concrete decision-making opportunities for young Native people to be part of the solutions? Are they on boards? Are they in governing positions? And they're just really interested to know how you're bringing that up. Thank you.
Nicole, you want to go? And then go, please.
While I'm enthralled with the sound of my own voice, I feel like I'm hogging the microphone. Well, I know of several organizations such as the National Indian Child Welfare Association, NAYA, I believe NARA and others have really been intentional about this, really are trying to actually create leadership positions on their boards to have youth really serving in the key leadership role. So really roles within the boards as well as additional governance opportunities outside of organizations such as Youth and Elders. But I think that there's, you know, I think those are wonderful, and I think that every other organization in this state, be that government, commission, and board, or any other nonprofit, is doing themselves a disservice if they are not also intentionally thinking about how to have young Native people serve in those roles. A Native voice is equally as relevant to a mainstream majority culture, environmental, or nonprofit organization as anyone else when you think about the important presence that our population has in this region.
I know there might be other comments, but let me go to a couple of the questions that were written. In what way can or should Native American organizations collaborate to best serve tribal people in cities, and how does that look for sharing information beyond simply networking? Are there specific actions that these national tribal organizations should be doing, and how will that impact what's going on in various urban communities? Comments or thoughts?
Oh, that's a really big one. That's kind of why we exist. The Native organizations throughout the country have become very, very deft at networking and reaching out and working with other organizations. I think you've heard it mentioned up here on a number of occasions how important that relationship building is, both within our own community, within Indian organizations in these different cities, and also with the tribes in the states in which we are, and with other national organizations like the National Congress of American Indians. I mean, there's just so many opportunities for these Native organizations to have an impact at all levels as it relates to networking.
Other responses to that question? If not, let's move on. There's one more here, then I'll go back to the microphone. Please tell us about community efforts and projects that would benefit Native leaders. So, Native leaders. So, what are some of those? We've talked a little bit about them. You know, I'm particularly interested to have a little bit of discussion from the panel here about, we talk about indigenous leaderships. I'm looking at some of the Indian leaders that are sitting at the tables out there, all of which come from a different sort of experience and perspective. So let's add to that comment, because I think the question is significant in terms of where we might want to go from here. Any comments?
I think events and opportunities like what's happening here right now and what's happening this evening are great opportunities and much appreciated, just to be able to give young Native leaders an opportunity to interact, you know, with at different levels with different professionals and different people is, I think, great for both building confidence and for getting a broader community to realize that there are leadership and leadership solutions in Native communities.
Yes, please.
Well, I think too.
No, you're on.
Okay, I think too that a lot of the revitalized traditional activities provide that opportunity. I certainly have seen it, to go back to canoes. I've certainly seen it with all the canoe nations. To be a paddler, to be a part of a canoe family, you have to take responsibility and eventually the older people have to hand it on because you can't keep doing it. It's a very practical thing right there, you know, so it depends on what scope of leadership you're talking about.
Thank you. Question from the mic.
Yeah, Kurt Webering, member. Last night, Elizabeth Colbert, and a writer on environmental issues, was in Portland to a sold-out crowd. She talked about climate change and was talking about birds that are becoming extinct, ocean acidification, which will dramatically change the oceans. And I'm wondering, from your perspectives, being close to the earth in a sense, in your traditions, can you bring wisdom to the discussions about global warming?
Eric?
So I think for tribal communities that are where culture is so strongly food associated, it's a, you know, huge issue. You can look at the potential impacts, as you said, to ocean acidification and anadromous fish, predicted levels and rises of stream temperatures in the Columbia Basin that would affect fish, to which tribes have treaty rights and cultural importance of those foods. And so we're working to, one, secure a permanent source of water for the tribe to meet its water rights for the needs of the community and in-stream flows. We're working to restore floodplain and in-stream processes that will hopefully improve temperatures and kind of ameliorate the effects of climate change. And we're working to understand the distribution of women's food so we can start running climate change scenarios and look at how climate change might change the distribution of those foods. And then we'll need to figure out ways to protect access to all of those so that community members can continue to use them. It's, you know, really incumbent upon all of us to try to reduce our contribution to that problem and slow it, but it's obviously a difficult challenge.
Let me just add one quick comment. The affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, which represents 57 tribes in the Northwest, Western Montana, some from Alaska, Northern California, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, has a climate change effort. A group has been together. There's going to be a major meeting of that in January of this coming year. It's been on that agenda and a big topic of those types of tribal discussions over the last several meetings. So they're on board with the discussion of the issue and are providing answers both to their individual communities, and you will see it in a broader context. The president of that organization, a Quinault Indian woman who's the president of the Quinault tribe, a lady by the name of Fawn Sharp, sits on the president's climate change committee. And so within this region, there is both national attention and regional attention being given to it at the tribal level. I appreciate the question. One more from the podium, and then we'll come. Yes, okay. Please.
They told me I wasn't going to have this question, but I'm going to say it anyway. My name's Anita McPhee, and I'm from the Tahltan Nation in northern British Columbia, and this is for Nicole and Janine. It's more a comment, and I wouldn't mind to talk to you after. It's a national issue in Canada for missing and murdered Aboriginal women. In fact, there's over thousands of missing and murdered Aboriginal women. We've urged our government to have a national inquiry into missing and murdered Aboriginal women, of which we've had no success. So just listening to you, I want to thank you for raising that issue, that, you know, human trafficking of women is a issue here in the U.S., and I wouldn't mind to talk to you about how we can, you know, maybe work together on looking at this being a North American issue. So thank you. Madhu.
We have run out of broadcast time for further questions, and we'll have to stop for the day. As we close, please join me in offering our sincere thanks to today's guests, Roy Samsel, Eric Quumps, Janine Comino, Roberta Cordero, and Nicole Maher, and special thanks to Carlos McNair for performing a round dance song for us today.